Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and discuss on future space technologies and these things we have our world famous speakers, Mr. David Schumacher, Professor Edward, Mr. James Eid, and Professor Rob. I want to share some good news from World Talent Economy Forums because our academy, Al Noor Academy, Asia Research and Development Academy, and World Talent Economy Forum today we just get our accreditation from United Nations because we want to offer high quality uh, like training, consulting, as well as different kind of market research we are doing. So definitely our speakers, our mentors, they will join in our program. Beside that, with Paris graduate schools, we are collaborating and we are offering undergraduate, masters, and PhD program. So I'm sure in our excitement and all of our program based on research, uh, so all of our students we want to develop them for the industry purpose. Even though those who finish their degree from our academy, definitely they will get the job. This is our commitment from World Talent Economy Forum. Already we are connecting with many corporations and small medium enterprise for our students. So now time that we are requesting all of our youth community, those who are communicate with us and those who want to really want to get real-time learning from Professor David, Professor Rob, Professor Edwards. Actually, Mr. James maybe work with me in my core team. He has to manage many things. So we are developing a world class team, and hopefully it will be very very helpful for Asia Pacific youth communities. Not only these discussions, we want to move with this practical experience, practical knowledge, and hands-on experience from industries and some good quality research development. So it's a teamwork. So those who are really interested to learn from our honorable speakers and mentors, so you directly can communicate with us and our team gonna support you. But from today we are offering our undergraduate, masters, and PhD program, as well as different kind of industrial research and project we are developing. Especially we are developing some energy project. So I hopefully we need a big team. Really now we need a big teams to handle all of our job and everything. So I want to start from today's discussion. This session is very very important, especially for youth communities. I can remember the last year before the COVID when we organized a talk in Malaysian University. I saw that thousands of students actually join in our talk for this spaceship because they have huge interest on space, especially youth community. They love to learn different kind of aspect of technology. So I want to start from Professor David Schumacher. How do you want to analyze today's topic?
Oh, good morning. Yes, it's an exciting topic talking about space and technology and all the things that go into it. And as I gave this some thought about this morning, I was thinking about how humans have ventured off into other areas. Living here in the North American continent, as it was settled by Europeans centuries ago, we saw that first we had an outreach by governments and then an outreach that was economic, and then that outreach was followed by individuals wanting something different, leaving where they were in Europe to come here. Of course, many centuries prior to that, there had been other people that had settled here that got here by different means. But I do see some interesting parallels as far as the technology of the 16 and 1700s, believe it or not, and the technologies of the 20 and 21st centuries. As people started to migrate from Europe into North America, this took weeks, maybe even longer, to be able to travel here, and they were completely cut off by what they had. They were able to bring with them supplies, and then they were able to grow and try to establish a foothold here with what they had. And I think we'll start to see some of that as we venture out into the cislunar space, the space here that from around the moon to the Earth. Being able to carry what we can up into orbit, 20th century, extremely expensive. Being able to cut those costs down to some degree by reusables. I guess the space shuttle was the first to demonstrate reusable technology, but more recently, what we've been seeing by SpaceX and what they've been able to do by reusables. We have other technologies, which I'll talk about, that are on the horizon that are coming up. And um, our time to be able to get into low Earth orbit is just a matter of hours. But as we move on to the moon, we're talking about days, usually about 3 days or so, to be able to travel there. We're talking about missions to Mars at some point, which is going to take months to get there and then beyond. So there'll be some differences, some similarities, but I think that this push, which is the reason I started out talking about Europeans coming to North America, is there's this push to always go beyond where you're at, to use the technology of the day that you have to move you forward and to not wait for the perfect situation, and to use what you can find and develop as you go. So I'll have more to say about that as we develop the subject this morning.
Thank you, Professor David Schumacher. Professor Edward, I know this is your best topic.
Mhm.
You like this kind of topic. So, what's your on analysis on that particular point?
Well, again, this is a fascinating topic, as some of your regular listeners probably know. As a little high school kid, I worked at NASA Goddard during the Apollo 11 moon landing. So I was literally like a kid in a candy store,
Mhm.
watching how the whole process of landing human beings on the moon developed. And I like to point out how things come around. I managed to get Buzz Aldrin, who was, of course, on the first moon landing, to do a chapter in my book. And I'll actually talk about his work. He's got some very interesting work concerning the future of space. And I'll make a few comments about that in a minute. But um, I completely agree with David. One of the things about being a human being is we're curious, we're explorers, we want to know about the world around us. We want to go out. It's just an incredibly human thing. We want to know. We are the knowing creature, and we always want more knowledge. And that's just one of our driving, defining forces. Um, in the area of space, just to put it in some context, the lesson I would give to your listeners, and I think most of them probably know this already, is space is a place, not a government program. It is a government program here in the U.S. and other countries as well. It's a place where you can not only you can do science, you can develop new technologies in space, you can explore, you can settle. Think of it as a place, just the way we thought of the American West as a space, as a place, when for those of us who live in the United States. Um, what you saw with the development of space was, at first, it was in fact a government program for both security reasons and military reasons, and essentially to kind of show the world that we have a system in this country, in the United States, that can do something as absolutely remarkable as sending a human being and sending human beings to the moon. The process of going to the moon was an incredible human achievement, one of the greatest achievements in human history. That's why the Human Achievement Alliance honors it as one of the great achievements. Right on the thing there. But the problem we had was that after the moon landings, which were very expensive, instead of the government ceding more space activity to the private sector, it kind of kept in there. And so, for example, the government decided to create a supposed reusable system, which is the space shuttle. But the problem was that instead of bringing costs down, the idea was that we would launch maybe a shuttle every week. This would bring the cost down because you reuse the thing. I think at most we might have had a dozen launches during a year. I think at the peak, and usually it was much less. The other thing is the system was not completely reusable. You see this big orange tank here? Well, it held liquid hydrogen and oxygen, which are non-toxic. and these little side boosters here would give it the first boost, and then they would drop away. And they were sort of reusable, except it was very expensive to retrofit them. And then this big tank, this big orange tank, would go almost to the edge of orbit, and then the shuttle would kind of have to give it a little push, and it would fall into the ocean. And so tens of millions of dollars capital equipment would sink to the bottom of the ocean. There were entrepreneurs back in the 1990s who were saying, well, why doesn't NASA simply put these tanks into orbit and let them be retrofitted so you can make a space station out of them? That's how entrepreneurs think. They think about, I don't want to dump $40 million or $50 million worth of capital equipment into the ocean. I want to do something with it. And in fact, there were plans, that I knew the people who put those plans together, to make the external fuel tanks such that you could retrofit them and therefore put them in orbit and build a space station. In fact, I did a calculation, and this was years before the shuttle went out of service. I calculated that if every tank had been put into orbit, you would have as much internal floor space as the entire Pentagon in Washington, D.C. I did the calculation. And yet that opportunity was missed. Well, and the other thing, of course, is that the real cost of putting humans into orbit, instead of going way down, continued to go up. It cost about $500 million to launch one shuttle flight. So again, incredible technological achievement, but it wasn't commercialized. Now, of course, what you see today, and I'm sure all of your listeners know, we see these entrepreneurs, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, there's some others, who basically are bringing the real costs down, because that's what entrepreneurs do. Governments often do a good job of basic research, things of that nature, but it's entrepreneurs who figure out how to apply them. Some of your listeners probably have heard the story I've given before, that Elon Musk, when he was developing his rockets early on, was told, the rockets, of course, have these cones, these nozzles on the bottom where the fire and everything comes out when the thing is pushed up. And they were going to do a test launch. And the engineers, I know one of his rocket designers, went to Elon and said, Elon, we've got a problem. There's a little crack in the bottom 6 inches of one of these things. What do we do? And if it had been NASA, they would have said, well, we have to stop the test. We have to have an investigative committee inside NASA. Everybody has to cover themselves so they don't get blamed if something bad happens. We've got Congress looking at us, so Congress might come along and say, well, why did you do this bad thing, and so forth. And Elon said to his engineers, well, guys, seriously, is it going to make a big difference? And they said, well, we really just don't see that. So he said, well, can't you just cut the bottom 6 inches of the little cone off? Just take that bottom 6 inches off where the crack is. And they said, yeah, that would probably work. And so they did it, and they tested the rocket and probably saved millions of dollars and months of time doing that. Or the other example I like to give is, I don't have it on this cup. I should have brought a copy. I should have brought a rocket model, which I do have, by the way, as you would expect. They have these little rockets on the side, these little nozzles on the side. They're gimbals that basically kind of can guide a rocket, and they're just kind of little nozzles. And Elon asks his engineers, go out and find out where NASA got these things so we can get some maybe. And they asked around. And they said, well, this costs hundreds of thousands of dollars for each. He said, that's too expensive. This is just a little motor thing. So they went to some hobby shops, and they found that they could buy something in a hobby shop, for a fraction of the cost that would do the same thing. And because it was his money, he basically said, yeah, let's go ahead and do it. And so that's what entrepreneurs can do. And as you well know, there's a contest going on literally right now about who is going to be the first private entrepreneur in space. Is it going to be Richard Branson with his suborbital flights, or is it going to be Jeff Bezos with his? I mean, so this is how exciting it is that with NASA, again, I know people who work at NASA, they're great people. If I had to sit around and have a drink with somebody, I'd love to do it with people from NASA, which I do. But it's these entrepreneurs who have their own money, and they put it in, and they try this and they try that, and you see what's happening. They're commercializing space. And we can talk a little bit later about some of the technologies that are coming out, because they're looking at infrastructure. They're looking at these kinds of things and trying to figure out how to build up a space infrastructure so that real costs go down, which is what happened with smartphones. These things used to cost, a whole lot. Well, they still cost a whole lot, but we went from having 0 people with a smartphone in 2007 to 87% of Americans having these things. That's what entrepreneurs do. They commercialize stuff. They bring the quality up and they bring the costs down. We want to see that kind of energy in space. And that's what we're seeing with Musk, with Bezos, with Branson, and I can name a number of others who are doing incredible work. So this is a very exciting time. And if you're listening in the Asian Pacific area, I don't want to get too political here, but here's a problem. We had hoped that the Chinese would be partners with us in the world, but right now they're doing incredible stuff in space too, by the way, but they're being a lot more nationalistic about it. So I suspect that what you're going to see is a lot of folks in other countries looking to work with Bezos, Musk, and these guys. And so to your students in Asia Pacific, hey, we've got some entrepreneurs over here. They're looking for techs. They're looking for competent people. They're looking for innovators. Hope you guys can work with us. It's exciting.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's really, really great session. Professor Rob, how do you want to analyze the topic? I think many interesting things to add.
Yeah, so I've heard some of the stories about being able to buy parts in hobby stores and put them in spacecraft. The thing that's always concerned me about that approach, and Musk clearly did have that approach, is the fact you're launching what is basically a large bomb over populated areas. And so the failure of one of those little parts could have a rather catastrophic outcome. And so granted, NASA was probably over engineering much of the spacecraft, but in the early history of space flight, the crashes were relatively seldom, given the fact that these guys were sitting on top of bombs, mostly built by the lowest bidder. Always when I thought about that, and when I was in graduate school, one of the guys that built the spacecraft was one of my professors, and he'd talk about their quality control process and how one of the things that made them so expensive is they had to be triple redundant. And then he talked about how they tested the parts. And he said, well, each segment was triple redundant, and then you got 3 parts for each component, and you tested the parts. And if you tested the first part and it failed, you went to the second part. And if you tested the second part and it failed, you went to the third part. And if you tested the third part and it failed, you installed the first part. And then you bet that the redundancies would cover. And that was the other point where I realized I really didn't want to be an astronaut, because I figured, yeah, maybe the odds are pretty slim that all 3 segments had installed 3 known defective parts, but the fact that was a reasonable possibility certainly kept me from wanting to be an astronaut anymore. And a few years back, I did get to go on the Vomit Comet. That's the aircraft that was equipped to travel and go to 0 Gs. And if you ever get a chance to do that, trust me when I say that 0 G is fun a couple times. It stops being fun really quick, about 7 or 8. So the most of us made it to 15. A few folks tossed their cookies somewhere around 7, 8, or 9. And the astronauts would typically do between 23 and 50 attempts. And God love them, I never would have made. I mean, I made it to 15. I would have never made it to 23. I would have been in the back of the plane, also pretty sick. The space program has amazingly developed a lot of spin-off technologies. Some of the things that even I wasn't aware of that came out of the program were things like infrared ear thermometers that were developed for the space program. Ventricular assist devices, which are heart pumps, came out of the space program. Small, lightweight, and it keeps people alive. It's LASIK surgery. If you've had LASIK surgery, I have had LASIK surgery, but the way they calculate how to cut the lens, that's from stuff they did and trying to approximate how to dock a spacecraft to the space station. That was LASIK came out of that. Cochlear implants, artificial limbs. A lot of the work with regard to lightweight materials and robotics are being applied now have been applied to artificial limbs to make them viable. LEDs. Out of the space program as well. Of course, Velcro came out of the space program. It's not on my list for some reason, but that came out of the space program. Scratcher-resistant lenses, having lightweight material you could see through that could resist damaging and scratching. Space programs, a lot of us grew up with something called a space blanket. These were I don't see very many of these anymore, but these were super lightweight, solar reflecting blankets that you carry, and on an emergency, they didn't have the greatest insulating potential, but they kept the heat in, and you could put a space blanket in your pocket and have room left over. And if you got stuck someplace, they were waterproof and they helped you retain the heat, and retain the heat to an amazing low degree. if you put it on right with the reflective part inside. But if you were also overheating, you could flop it over and have the reflective part outside, and it would keep you cool. An amazing piece of technology. We don't see that often anymore. 3D food printing. Once again, I was aware that was kind of in science fiction. Wasn't aware we'd actually progressed that into the space program as well. But BHACS developed a 3D printing system for food such as pizza that I'm kind of surprised we don't have broader distribution at the moment. Because I don't know about you that grew up in Star Trek, having a food replicator where you tap in a key and then a hamburger comes out is pretty good. And granted, even though this isn't out of the space program, we do have fully artificial meats. And if you've ever had a chance to try one, like the Impossible Burger, it's actually pretty good. It's my favorite burger at the moment. Aircraft anti-icing systems, highway safety, improved radial tires, chemical detectors, which are really handy in trying to locate chemical leaks or environmental problems, space program. And public safety, everything from landmine removal to fire-resistant reinforcement, the stuff that we use to protect firefighters. A lot of that came out of the space program, because if you have a fire in a spaceship, same thing if you have a fire in a submarine, you're SOL. And so they had to develop techniques to put out those fires, and those techniques and technologies have been applied to our own fire teams. Ever heard of the Tempur-Pedic mattress? Out of the space program. The mattress that forms to you is a space program offshoot. If you've ever had one of those things, though, the problem it's got, especially when we've got heat waves the way we've got right now, is they don't shed the heat particularly well. So they're not great in the heat. But on a cold night, if you want a comfortable bed, that was Tempur-Pedic, and it's out of the space program. Enriched baby food, freeze drying, portable cordless vacuums, air scrubbers, which for those of us that live in fire country have come in really handy the last couple of years, that allow our air inside our homes to be relatively breathable. Even something like the Bowflex, the thing you see on TV with people exercising, they had a problem with astronauts maintaining muscle mass, and so the Bowflex concept came out of NASA because of that problem of keeping muscle mass up for astronauts. So they didn't, when they came back to Earth, they weren't basically paraplegics because they were too weak to stand. Water purification. Solar sails, the thing that we're using to combat global warming and shift to a more renewable infrastructure, that's out of the space program. We needed to power those things while they were in space. It wasn't likely we were going to ship gasoline up to them. It was not going to be particularly viable. So using the sun to power this stuff is our go-to for powering space vehicles, particularly satellites that have to be up for years and years, and you can't send up any type of energy source. Pollution remediation, space program, the kind of stuff you had to clean up air in a space station at scale. You can clean up air pollution in other ways as well. That one interesting, GPS errors. The old GPS systems were not particularly reliable. In fact, they were intentionally not reliable so people couldn't use them to launch missiles at you. They've since got more reliable, but they're still not as accurate as you would like. And being able to use dithering to get accurate location from GPS, that was something the space program had to resolve, because they needed really tight tolerances if you're doing anything with regard to you're repairing satellites or docking to space stations or even finding the damn things. You had to make sure that dithering was turned off, and you could actually accurately get to where you wanted to go, and that was all developed in the space program. A couple more: structural analysis software, something that they should be using a lot more of in Florida. Remotely controlled ovens, OpenStack, a technology that's become incredibly popular on the software side in technology, out of the space program. Powdered lubricants, a lot of us live on that stuff. It's the WD-40 that doesn't have oil in it, and you can spray and not get sticky. I use a lot of that in my automotive work. Gold plating, food safety. It goes on and on. The program has just thrown out technology after technology, and the interesting thing about all of that is it just took somebody to think about the use it had in a spaceship or a space in the space program, and then figure out what else you could do with that. The example, of course, being Velcro. Just being able to, when you're, rather than floating in space, being able to stick to the ground or put on clothing quickly, Velcro is going to be handy. Though I do remember when I was growing up, some of the early comments that we'd all be wearing clothes held together by Velcro, fortunately didn't come to pass, because that looked pretty stupid when we were done. But a lot of amazing things out of the space program, and I imagine a lot of amazing things are going to come later.
Thank you. This is excellent discussions. I just want to share some good news from our side, because I shared that soon we are moving with our educational program and other things. I said that we are working like World Talent Economy Forum and Paris Graduate Schools. We have our academy, Al Noor Academy. We are working together for our uh, uh, for our PhD and masters and undergraduate program. Beside that, this is Paris graduate. I told you that we are very much engaged with the developing nations, and we are trying to develop the developing nations different academic activities, training and developments, and many more things. 2006, you know that Grameen Bank, they win Nobel Prize. So Paris graduate schools, and we start to training 18,000 employee of Grameen Bank. So we started our project already. So we need people, we need team ups, we need to. This is my colleagues and as well as my professor, Professor Shaikhul Mojid. So we already team up with excellent work. Beside that, I just want to share one of our good achievement. Hopefully, it will motivate our audience as well as our speakers, because we are very much industry driven. We love to develop the industrial activities. Especially, I told you that our focus is developing nations, and I told you that developing nations also have many good things. So if we can collaborate, maybe we can do. This is our projects. This is our solar projects. Not so big. But if you compare the country like Bangladesh or this kind of countries, it's really big, because they are small. They do not have enough land. So after that, after the installations, our next target that we want to move with our 100 megawatt solar project. So I request the youth community, the people, the speakers, we want to create an ecosystem. We need a team, we need a teamwork, we need to develop an ecosystem for improve the human lives. So when we have to improve the human lives, we need knowledge, we need technology, we need team, we need experts, many things we need. So this is our objectives. When I work in my undergraduate level, I get chance to work with Grameen Bank as a researcher, and that time I learned from the Dr. Muhammad Yunus that theory is always good. When you take the class and everything, this is excellent, but I want to create a difference. I want to change human life. So that's why I have to touch many darties and many things. So that time I also get some sort of motivation. So beside this knowledge development, if we can develop some real interesting projects and which will actually help our community, it will be helpful. So beside that, from Malaysia, even from India, we are developing cyber securities, autonomous vehicles, with our own even robotics engineering. So we are trying to develop our work in an effective way, not only this kind of open discussions, open dialogue. Side by side, we are doing a lot of industrial work. We need support, we need teamwork, we need managers, we need trainer, we need researchers, we need policymakers. So the speakers, I already declared that those who join in our board of advisor, if you support our World Talent Economy Forum initiative, I can confirm you can change millions of people's life. I'm sure you can change millions of people, like, because we are last 12 and 13 years, we are seriously working with the developing nations. So hopefully this discussion, what we are discuss, what we are getting as an outcome, so when we apply it, it will be really beautiful for the developing nations as well as for the developed nations. I know developed nation has a lot of scholars like you, lot of intellectual people like you, lot of good organizations. So we are looking for more collaborations. Mr. Jamsit, so what do you want to add for today?
Great discussion. What I want to add is it starts with a kind of encouragement towards balance. I don't want people to get too high or too low, because we could get lost, and I have myself, in how exciting this is, all the potential possibilities. And I think we need to be balanced in our approach if we're going to make optimal decisions. If we sell ourselves short, we get too low, we don't achieve what we could. If we get too excited and too high, then we overshoot. And so sometimes we need to be balanced in our approach. And there's a couple of things that I wanted to mention. one is there was this great book, and I'm going to butcher the title, but it was by Penrose, The World of the Very Large and the World of the Very Small. And a lot of what we're talking about is the world of the very large, but it's enabled by the world of the very small. Some of these things that we're talking about, the technologies that we're developing, have been done by understanding the world of the very small. And we have had an Einstein of the world of the very large, but we have not yet had an Einstein of the world of the very small. And believe me, when Einstein came up with his theories of the worlds of the very large, he wasn't very popular. He was revolutionizing what people had spent their lives teaching. Their careers are based on a certain way of thinking, and he upended all of that. So he was resented. You know, we think of him now as this kindly old man who was brilliant and a genius. And, you know, in his time, he had it pretty rough. So some of these people now doing things that we will one day think were amazing achievements, you know, are going to have a little hard time getting accepted. And that's just the way life is. So just treat it with balance. Don't get too high, don't get too low. But, you know, we're still discovering things all the time. Like I was just reading about these Earth-like planets that are in the middle of our galaxy, and they're not attached to any star. Like we orbit the sun, which is a star. And, you know, so that's kind of how I thought of planets orbiting a star. And no, these are planets that are Earth-like, that are not attached to any star in the middle of our galaxy. So, you know, how do we put space in context? It sounds like you can't do it, but you can. All you have to do is use a thought experiment. Now, thought experiments were very popular ones, and Einstein used them all the time. But now, you know, with people with their practical orientation towards making money, sometimes think of that as making stuff up. And, you know, this making stuff up, or as I think of it, as thought experiments, are incredibly useful, but are sometimes discouraged by our society. We don't reward this. So what I want to really stress here is research and development has to be at the upfront. We really need to value it and treasure it and fund it, because research and development has all these offshoots, unanticipated offshoots that Rob was listing for us. It was like, you know, we didn't know about these kinds of mattresses, and you know, we didn't intend to make them when we started out doing this stuff. So this has incredible boons to our society, but they were based on research and development. And so, you know, when you think, where does my tax dollar go? You know, well, don't resent a nickel of it going to research and development, please. This is really important stuff. So, you know, I think, you know, when we put the space in its proper context, and we think about how we're polluting it with these satellites. So I don't want to get too down, too low. I don't want to be too critical of this. But, you know, we once had this idea of just, if I didn't like the regulations in my town, I'd just move. And go west, young man was a phrase. And we did it. And we trampled those in front of us and do it. But, you know, then we ran up against the Pacific Ocean. You know, we couldn't keep expanding. And so then, you know, but this natural urge to get away from the regulations and just keep expanding, keep going forward, then space became the final frontier. And I know Rob knows where that quote comes from. And the idea of doing this, of just continue to expand, you know, is something that we have to ask a question or two about. You know, do we need to keep expanding? What about taking care of where we are? What about cleaning up the side of our own streets? You know, maybe that's where some of our research and development should be headed towards. But, you know, fine, you know, launch all these things. But I'll tell you, what you can build and put up can be taken down and destroyed. And I don't want to pick on any countries in particular. So since I live in Northern California, I'll talk about somebody who's a Dodger fan from LA builds this missile that takes down whatever Elon Musk puts up. And so, you know, Jeff Bezos puts up, and he's even in his thing, and this Dodger fan, hated Dodgers, shoots it down. So what do we do? Well, there has to be consequences for that. Well, who's going to enforce them? Oh, all of a sudden we have space regulations, and who's enforcing the space regulations? So these are some of the unanticipated developments that come with people just firing stuff into the great beyond. And then there's competition. Well, I own this part of the space. You can't come into this part of the space because I own it. You see, my satellite was here first. And then who's going to sort out those questions of territory and space? We think it's unimaginably large. Well, we thought the Mississippi was unimaginably wide. We could just pour all our industrial waste into it. No big deal. And now we have islands of plastic in the Pacific. The oceans aren't big enough for us. Our space won't be big enough for us either, until we start to balance our approach to everything and to do things in a spirit of cooperation rather than I'm first, I'm the best, I own this. Because the Native Americans didn't think you could own land, and they thought it was kind of mysterious that someone would offer them something for something that they can buy or sell. Well, now we're thinking about this, and we're not even thinking about this. This could be true in space. Who's going to buy this area of space and put up laws that you can't come into this area of space? Because this is in the foreseeable future. To just run a thought experiment, how will this play out? And who's making these decisions? And who's giving? If you fire a rocket into my satellite, who's going to call you to account? So see, these are some of the other questions that we're not asking when we just get too excited about the possibilities. But yeah, fund research and development. And yes, this is not, we can't stop what's going on. This will happen, but think it through before we just get too excited about some individual firing a rocket up into space, because that's not the solution. So I think that this is a very exciting time. The technological change has just been amazing. And these are not miracles, but these are marvels. Thanks again, Sharif, for a wonderful show.
Thank you, Mr. James. Mr. Manuel, I know you are expert on that area. So how do you want to analyze today's topic?
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. So today, talking about the future in space or future space possibilities, I would like to focus more on how we can use space technologies to support development on Earth, like in the future sense. So these days, most of the space technologies that are being used are satellites for different applications, for different geospatial applications, as well as the Internet of Things, which is using more of satellite technologies. And speaking of using space technologies to support development on Earth, the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, UNOSA, had a program on the same called the United Nations Program on Space Applications, and I actually wrote down few of the applications of that program. So one is biodiversity and ecosystem. So we can use satellites for biodiversity ecosystem. We can use satellites to fight the climate change issues. We can use satellites for global health, and these days we have telemedicine, and for telemedicine we need a stable internet access that could be provided by using the satellites internet access platforms. And we have GNSS, geographical navigation satellite system, and also the GPS for navigation. We have also satellite communications, um, and remote sensing and Earth observation. We can use satellites for remote sensing and Earth observation. We can also use satellites for natural resource management. This is a program that is being used in Africa, especially because Africa has a lot of natural resources, but we didn't know how to track or how to know what we have in these regions. So these days we are using satellite imagery to track those access. And the last one is disaster management. So for disaster management, UNOSA in 2006 established a program called UN Spider. So the definition for Spider is space-based information for disaster management and emergency response. So uh, because of the UN Spider, many countries, many developing countries um, that did not have their own satellites, they were able to get access to satellite data from developed countries that helped them to um, in case of disaster management. For example, when uh, when Brazil had some fire in the Amazon forest, some of the satellite data were provided by other developed countries and helped to limit the damage. And also, one of the points I would like to add is the globalization. Like speaking of the future of space, it's important to have a global collaboration. I gave the example of UN Spider, where developed countries were helping developing countries. So that could be the case in the future as well. And we also have the UN space program, where every year it's like a meeting between different governments and different institutions. They come together to discuss the future of space and the possible future collaborations. And recently, the European Union also launched a program where they were selecting experts from around the world to propose new ideas and new proposals for Earth observation and geospatial information. So I would say that uh, in talking about the future in space, it's important also to look into how we can use the different space technologies and apply them for development on Earth. Thank you.
David, I think you're up next. And you're muted.
Yeah, it sounds like Sharif is
Thank you.
frozen. Oh, there he's back.
There he
Thank
is back.
Good.
Sharif, did you have a question? I didn't hear it if you did.
I have one question. Like example, when we discussing about
Sharif, you're going in and out. We can't make out what you're saying.
Well, let me just add a couple of comments there. I see Sharif.
futuristic,
Yeah.
I think we get the.
Go ahead,
We need
Dave.
to work
Can
on
you
your bandwidth.
Talk
We
about
need
the
to get you a
future.
satellite.
Yeah, get Musk to work on that for you.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, well, while we're waiting for Sharif to come back, I've been fascinated by the comments and stuff that we've had so far, and I especially enjoyed the trip discussing the spinoffs from the space program. And I was chuckling to myself as I went through that, not because any of those were irrelevant, they're all very relevant. But why is it that what I remember out of the spinoffs are something called Tang, a breakfast drink, and
Yes.
out of all of those things, that's what I remembered the most. But that ties in to what Manuel is talking about, I think, about using satellites and other space technology as far as for promoting betterment here on Earth, because those things are directly related. as we reach out and do new things, we can take those spin-offs, if you will, and convert them to things that can help here in everyday life. So some of the things about going into space right now that excite me is space tourism. The Voyager rotating space station, which could start going up here in just a few years, and developments in work like the space elevator program. I just recently saw an article that I want to be able to read in depth on CERN proposing space elevator, as well as some other nonprofits and so forth that are working to develop that. What will be the spin-offs that will come from having high tensile strength materials for the elevator? What will be the spin-offs where you have commercial companies launching into space on a regular schedule and being able to excite people about the possibilities of being able to go themselves, to be able to participate? What will drive people going into universities and taking up areas of study because they are extremely interested, not just because it's going to be the highest paying job or because that's where you need to go to get your future, but when you're really driven and motivated by something that really excites you. These two are also spin-offs, which I think are really important. So I think there's great value in space tourism. I think there's great value in being able to put up a space station that is not an international, though I really like the idea of the International Space Station. It's been 20 years and it's done marvelous work and it's being renewed all the time. The new Chinese space station, those are exciting. But I think that when we translate this into the private sector, and the private sector does, if you'll pardon the expression, a sexier job of being able to demonstrate what can be done in these environments than what governments can. And that is a promotion that doesn't dwell on maybe some of the duller aspects of what's going on. It's something that really, truly excites. Once again, I remember Tang and freeze-dried food all these years later, and those were commercial enterprises. So that's how I want to piggyback on what we've talked about so far. And Sharif, I'm glad you're back.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Professor Edward. Yes, Professor Edward, please continue.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to have to go in a few minutes, but this is, again, one of my favorite discussions. So I pushed some meetings back because I couldn't resist to do this. By the way, Rob talked about how for example, redundancy and safety were originally implemented. And then if you're interested, the best book I think on Apollo is by Charles Murray and his wife, Catherine, Apollo, the Race to the Moon. And so any of you who are interested, he goes into great detail. He interviewed most of the principals involved, and in fact, he was I did an interview with him on the 50th anniversary of the first moon landing, but it wasn't an in-person interview because he was in Houston being wined and dined by all the officials because of his incredible book. So I think that's an important issue. And by the way, James and a couple of others have mentioned, James especially, about thought experiments. And The Habit of Thought, by the way, is a very good book on how to think. But I want to give you an example of the best way to do thought experiments. You want me to hold up one of the best thought experiments about space? Here you go. This is science fiction. This is Arthur C. Clarke's book, The Fountains of Paradise, which, by the way, takes place in Sri Lanka. So for all of you listeners in Sri Lanka, Arthur C. Clarke led much of his life in Sri Lanka. So take a look at this book. This is about a space elevator. This was published in the late 1970s. Clarke, of course, was a real scientist who was looking into all the possibilities. And sure enough, this is a book from about 2001, 2002 on the space elevator. It's a very good book. It was 20 years ago, but the authors of this book really looked into not only the issues of materials technology, but also into the economics of a space elevator. One of the problems with the government programs is that they're technologically advanced, but they're so costly. So you really have to look at the economics of it. So, and there have been a lot of breakthroughs, and maybe we could do a whole future debate on, is it going to be Elon Musk's and Jeff Bezos's rockets, or is it going to be a space elevator in the future, or some combination? Who knows? But anyway, I want to add a few closing thoughts here that I think are important. I want to take, not exception, but put in context the idea of spin-offs from the space program. Many of those discoveries could have been made a lot cheaper without the space program. It just so happened that because we needed to go to the moon, we had to develop the shuttle, we had to develop all the human technology to keep astronauts alive, healthy, and so forth. NASA had to develop these kinds of technologies, usually in partnership with the private sector. And it's a credit to entrepreneurs that they figured out how to use these discoveries and breakthroughs to say, hey, I can create exercise equipment and make a whole market out of exercise equipment because NASA has done this one thing, so let's do that. All of the examples we're talking about, in most cases, are entrepreneurs trying to figure out how to take the technology that's developed and to commercialize it, bring the cost down, make profits with it. The other thing I want to mention, I think is very important, is space law. And this is very important. We have a 1965 outer space treaty, which didn't establish property rights, which I'm very much in favor of. But what it did was to say that any entity operating in space has to have a safety zone around it. So if you have a space station or whatever, some other country or entity cannot come and interfere with your activities and endanger your safety. This is kind of a de facto property right. And what it has done is allowed a lot of activity in low Earth orbit. Now, a couple of things that have been done recently, for example, a few years ago, the United States essentially said, we interpret this as allowing for example, private property rights to mine asteroids. And that's absolutely essential, because if a company is going to put millions and billions of dollars into doing something like that, they have to get some kind of return on their investment. This does not necessarily exclude anyone. It simply says it opens things up. One of the things we are going to have to deal with, James, I think you made this point, is when you have literally thousands and thousands of satellites up there, it's kind of a common, so everyone dumps their satellites up there. And we're going to have some kind of a system where I have the right to this spot here, and you can't put, if something that interferes with, for example, my line of sight. That's all going to be worked out, just as property rights were worked out in the United States when we were expanding west. Or, for example, there's property rights in Scotland for rivers. So if you have a piece of river going through your property, you can't dump stuff into that river. It's going to pollute the property owner downstream and so forth. These are going to be very important issues. But the idea is to keep the system as open as possible so entrepreneurs can sit around and figure these things out. I'll just end with this. Space, as I say, is a place, not a government policy. It's a place that people, governments and private companies have been doing incredible things. These incredible breakthroughs are going to be allowing folks back here on Earth to apply the technology to do incredible stuff. Again, Starlink is a really important breakthrough because it means that we're going to have 3 competing technologies to allow the kind of connectivity that we have right on this call. We have fiber optics, we have Wi-Fi towers, and now we have Elon Musk's satellites up there, and hopefully maybe Sharif will be able to use that, and it might be a more efficient system for doing these calls. I don't know. But that's the cool thing about competition. That's the cool thing about entrepreneurs sitting around saying, how can I really do more cool stuff, create more value? Because remember, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about creating value that benefits not only the creator, who deserves benefits and deserves statues to what they're doing in the park, but of course it benefits all of us. So I'm going to have to jump off, I'm afraid, but thank you, Sharif, for another incredible session. I'm looking forward to some future ones like that.
Thank you, Professor Edward, for joining today. Professor Rob.
Sure. Well, right now, the fascination with regard to space is really this idea of space tourism, being able to send people up into space to either experience the world at altitude and eventually build space hotels that you can go up and spend an incredible amount of money to circle the planet. Given my own experience in that vomit comet thing, I'm still thinking my idea of a good time is probably not to be weightless. When I had difficulty handling weightlessness for a few minutes, handling weightlessness for a week would be kind of problematic. And the idea I'd spend $250,000 for 10 minutes of that experience, when I could probably put on a set of VR goggles and get the visual part of that without the discomfort or worrying about if somebody hooked up a particular fuel line properly below me, is probably good for me. But the concept is it's making access to space ever cheaper, and as you lower the cost of space access, you can start to do some interesting things. One of them, of course, is address things like global warming. One of the theories of addressing global warming is to actually block off part of the sun and deal with it that way. It's too costly currently to approach that problem now, but if you get to the point where heavy lift isn't very expensive, then you can do some pretty amazing things. Edward mentioned space elevators. That was for a long time thought to be kind of interesting science fiction, but relatively impossible because of the nature of the tether. And the problem with the tether is it's got to not only support the weight of the car that's coming up, it's got to support its own weight. And we're talking about a tether that's measured in miles and not insignificant number of miles. So that weight was a problem. Now it looks like carbon nanotubes could do the job. They're light enough and strong enough to physically create a tether, and that would mean you'd have the equivalent of an elevator that would take you up into an area where you don't need heavy lift anymore, and that would make space access far cheaper than it currently is. And we could do some things like clean up the mess we've got of throwing a bunch of stuff up around the planet and not having a plan to get rid of it once it's up there. Then you go up on the web and you can see what happens when some of this stuff runs into things like the space station at speed, and it's not pretty. So it allows us to clean up some of the mess we've got, but it also allows us to do things like mine the asteroids, and there are significant precious metals in the asteroid belt, and if we can get the mining of those asteroids down cheaply enough, then that becomes a viable source for those materials, and of course eventually we'll have space manufacturing, and that will allow us to spread from where we are to where we want to go. Now, I say where we want to go. The issue for our race right now is we've got a single point of failure for the entire race with regard to the planet, and the dinosaurs certainly discovered what can happen if you don't have someplace else to go, if something happens to your ecosystem, and so at least having an ability to carry the race beyond the planet gives us a chance of surviving the kind of asteroid impact that we still believe took out the dinosaurs. And we have had a number of surprisingly close calls over the last couple of years with regard to large asteroids we haven't picked up until we're too close. And we do not have a viable space defense program yet. While I wasn't a huge fan of the last administration, the idea of a space force or an entity that's focused on defending against space-borne attacks, given that effectively a space-borne attack by nature took out the dominant species before us, is probably not a stupid idea to have, regardless of my thought of that administration. So in the end, this exploration of space could be the way we sustain ourselves past the point of a global disaster. I mentioned a couple of days ago that one of my big concerns was discovering what the Hadron Collider, where a lot of us were concerned that the Hadron Collider was going to create a black hole and wipe out the planet, maybe the solar system. That the mathematical analysis that was done that talked about the probability of such an event looked fairly remote, and then it turned out it was 2 magnitudes off in the wrong direction. Still fairly remote, but that's not the kind of mistake you want with a world-ending experiment. You want that experiment. If you want a world-ending experiment, you kind of like to have that on a planet you're not living on, because getting off the planet is a problem. So space gives us that opportunity to step away from the planet in case of a large natural or unnatural disaster. We keep throwing nuclear weapons around. It's going to be unnatural disaster. So having a place to go, having a way to sustain the race is very important, and also having a play at being able to do experiments that are dangerous, because we're constantly exploring things like new power sources, new energy types. We want to understand the secrets of the universe. But one decent sized mistake and your experimentation and your planet may be over. So those kinds of things should probably be done off planet. And if you can make it cheap enough to do those things off planet, then you can better protect the race and the planet, and better assure our own sustainability going forward. So I'm a big believer in outer space research, not only for the spin-offs in terms of technology, but for that chance, granted somewhat remote, that we may need to go to space to escape something that's happened to the planet, a major disaster. We're basically one large volcano eruption away from a new ice age, and we're not looking too good on global warming either. So having a way to address some of these problems and at least escape a world-ending catastrophic event would seem to be a wise move to make when you right now have basically a single point of failure with regard to the planet, and we really don't know enough about what the sun's going through, or the trajectory of a lot of those extrasolar assets that come in and visit us every few thousand years, to make me feel secure that we can survive the next close call. So for me anyway, the space exploration is critical for the survival of the race, and something we should continue to fund.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Manuel.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to add that, like Mr. Rob mentioned, Professor Rob mentioned it, space exploration is also important, because if we take considering planetary defense, it's important to establish some different space programs for Moon, for Mars, as well, because right now we don't have any critical situation with asteroids, but in the future, in 2029, we have the Apophis asteroid that might get very close to Earth, and maybe many more can come in the next decades. So it's important to establish a space exploration program. But also, I'd like to come back on the space law and regulations points. It's important to have policymakers coming together to discuss the matters on who will own space, especially if we are going to make a settlement on the Moon or Mars. Who is going to own those different regions of the Moon and the Mars? So that also is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jamsit.
Thank you, Sharif. I want to start with a correction. The Roger Penrose book that I was referring to is called The Large, the Small, and the Human Mind, and highly recommended reading. Edward and I go back and forth because he's so enthusiastic about the entrepreneurial spirit, and I don't mean to dampen that enthusiasm at all. I just think that it needs to be balanced, and we find out then wherever we go, whatever we do, including space, I'm predicting this, of course, we haven't done it yet, but when we start talking about property rights, you're going to have regulatory bodies governing those. And if I had to choose between NASA and the entrepreneurs shooting rockets into space, I would choose NASA. Fortunately, we can do both. We don't have to choose. But what we have to do is cooperate. Because I'll go back to my, whatever a San Francisco Giants fan could shoot into space, rotten Los Angeles Dodgers fan can shoot down. So what if that starts happening? Who's going to take control over that situation? How do we cease hostilities in space? So these are not things that we can leave to the industrial military complex to solve. It's going to require some regulatory body. And it doesn't mean one or the other. You can do both if you approach it in the spirit of cooperation and what's good for all. not just good for one or two. One country, America first is America alone. So no, no, no. We have to work with others. And if you start with the teamwork aspect, you'll accomplish far more than any individual will. So I think that these are the things that I want us to, we need to have a futuristic tendency. And I'll tell you how this can help you as an individual, because Rob mentioned the Impossible Burger. It actually tastes good. When I went to Italy the last time I did, I was introduced to jackfruit, and it was like, wow, that's a great sandwich. Holy smokes, I couldn't believe it. And then what did I do? I invested in Beyond Meat. It's a company, and it's on the stock exchange, and you can buy shares in it, and it's made me a lot of money. So rather than investing in fossil fuel industry, which is investing in the past, invest in the future. And holy cow, people started to actually think, hey, these burgers are not half bad. Actually, they're good. So people change their habits, they change their behavior. And if you can spot it a little bit ahead of the curve, you can invest and make money off of it. So, this is self-interest wrapped up in this is good for the planet. But why not make money myself? Because money is still currency. So I'm not opposed to any of this. I'm not saying that you shouldn't make money. I'm not saying you shouldn't be an entrepreneur. Not everybody's cut out to be an entrepreneur. They shouldn't be looked down upon. They can still be productive. Entrepreneurs sometimes aren't good at accounting. Sometimes they don't have law degrees. Sometimes you need a team. And I think if we take a team approach and not an us versus them approach, you can accomplish far more. And we're still in an us versus them environment right now, and we've got to change. And you start with yourself. Change yourself first. Change your attitude first. And change your mind and your heart. Start showing compassion for others, because if anybody's suffering in the world, we're all suffering a little tiny bit. And if we make things better for people in the world, you will feel better, just a little tiny bit. And any incremental improvement is a good improvement. So I want to start with that, kind of finalize with that thought. And the other thing I really want to emphasize is, however much we know, we only know a little. Keep that in mind. It'll keep you humble, because we get ahead of ourselves so often by thinking we've got stuff figured out that is so complicated that we figure out a portion of it, and then we think it, and I think a subject matter expert knows 10% of a subject that everybody else only knows 5% about. And so they look like they know it all, but they only know 10%, but they know a lot more than I do. So I think I look up to them. But, there's unintended consequences, sometimes good, sometimes devastatingly bad, to these things that we were doing. So I advise caution, pragmatism, and cooperation. And these are the ways that we make progress that's sustainable into the future, because who knows what tomorrow will bring. Some of it's incredibly exciting. I can't wait to a food since, we just press a button and Earl Grey hot tea comes out. Come on. Who wouldn't want that? So thanks again, Sharif, for a great program.
Thank you. It's really, really great discussions and great learning for our Asia Pacific community. So I directly want to go for the concluding remarks. Before that, I want to request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible with your government, with your corporation, with academia. And most important thing is that if you directly want to learn from our speakers and our mentors, as well as from our board of advisors, I think we are developing our opportunities for you. So when you join, I'm sure this journey will be has lot more interesting things, and especially we are engaging with industry as well as academia. So hopefully it will be very much helpful. And in terms of transparency, honesty, and sincerity, we give it number one priority, no choice, because maybe we are in last 1 year in online, but we do lot of our work in the offline with our reputations, with our honesty and sincerity. So this is the things World Talent Economy Forum, because we are thinking about modern science, engineering, and technology. But beside that, we have to teach our youth community about honesty, sincerity, and transparency. I think, yes, developing nations has a lot of challenges, Even there are many corruptions and other things, but definitely I know 90% people actually good. 90% people, even the developing nations and whatever it is, they are very good. The problem is the system. So we have to develop the system. So how we can develop institution and system if we have modern knowledge? So that is the things World Talent Economy Forum developing. We want to create a more like modern and scientific process, and this, from this process, our youth community, they can be the future leader. They can be the a leader for their community, who will solve many problems with honesty, sincerity, and with their integrity. So that is the way of transforming one society, and we believe in that. And we try to learn from both of the developed nations, developing nation, and many of the cases, maximum our speakers actually very good scholars and highly reputable scholars from the developed nations. What is the reason behind that? We want to create a good example. We want to create a good example for our youth community. Hey, if you want to be Mr. Rob, you have to do it. If you want to be like Mr. David, you have to do it. If you want to be like Mr. James, you have to do it. Or even if you want to be like Mr. Manuel, this way you have to develop. Because like from my academic experience, you cannot teach much to the students like science, this, that. They have to be motivated. They have to set their goals. So this is called talent economy. When there is a good example, there is a very, very good example in front of them, then they become motivated. And that is true. There are many entrepreneurs, they are corrupted. There are many politicians, they are corrupted. But we do not want that kind of example. We want a fresh blood. We want a fresh example. That's why World Talent Economy Forum always try to connect with the highly reputable scholars from developed nations. So thank you all for all of your support. We are doing hard work 7 days a week. So hopefully at least we can contribute for few of the peoples, and they may change their life, and then they will change their community. We cannot change everything. We only change some human resources. So these resources will change the community. So that is the strong commitment we have. We need to team up. So we are request all of our speakers, though I already invite like Professor David, Professor Robs, for our board of advisor, Mr. James Seed. I request you for our core team, because we need a world-class manager who can run different kind of projects and other things. Even Mr. Manuel, I know that you have excellent organizations. We are open for collaborations. So that is the way we are improve. And the audience, please share our content. And this is 100% free. Many youth community, they said, hey, we do not have good content. Many guardian complain, hey, we do not have good content in the social media, Facebook, but we are creating example. I'm sure last 1 year, even Professor Rob actually with us from day one. So from day one, actually, we are trying to develop a very good content which will be helpful for our community development, which will be helpful for the youth community development. And especially 40% people live in Asia Pacific. They have good infrastructure. They have many talented people. They have 50 to 60% people, those who are youth. Just we need to develop the system and develop the institutions. And for doing these things, we need proper knowledge. And I'm sure our board of advisor, our mentors, they have enough knowledge, those who can change our youth community. So that is the initiative, not only this kind of open dialogue. We want to take more initiative from industry and from academia. Thank you for all of your support. Last 1 year, we are getting from all of our speakers. So I directly request for concluding remarks for today. First, Professor David Schumacher, then Mr. James Seed, then Mr. Manuel, and finally Professor Rob.
Sharif, really great show. I have got a lot out of this myself. Where I want to go with my concluding remarks is back along the lines of where I started, talking about the human spirit. The fact that we are motivated to make things better, to solve problems. Now, I come from an engineering background, so maybe it's just me that wants to solve problems. But as I look at history, I see that we're constantly doing that as a people all across the planet. And that's what we will continue to do, because it's an innate part of us. We will move forward. We will evaluate where we're at. evaluating the fact of putting all of our eggs in one basket, only having the human species on this one planet, clearly is a problem that needs to be solved. We need to move forward. We need to continue to focus on the betterment of our future and for everyone on this planet, and then on the places that are around us, whether they be space stations or O'Neill cylinders, or whether they be living on other nearby planets or moons. As we move forward, this all sounds fantastic right now, but here in the near future, more and more of this will sound concrete. When we can look up and see two space stations floating over our heads in the evening sky, that tells me something about the 21st century. I'm looking forward to just a few short years away of seeing a space station that has artificial gravity on it so that we don't have to endure the weightlessness if we want. The hub is still weightless. People can still experience that if they want, but when they move into the living areas, there is something that approximates gravity of 1G on Earth. These are things that are coming very soon. When we look up and see that there are regular space flights taking people that can spend a lot of money to experience space, that's exciting to me because I look forward to that being available on a regular basis, much like the way flying was. I am old enough to remember looking up and seeing my first airplane at about age 5 or 6 and dreaming about being on board. And it took me another 15 years or so before I actually got onto a plane. But now plane travel is pedestrian, if you will. I mean, many people can travel very easily by plane. So these type of things will be coming to us. It's part of our nature to continue to develop and to continue to move forward. We need to do it in the safest way possible by continuing to evaluate and have discussions and bring in the rule of law. But it is something that's part of us that we're not going to stop. And me, for one, I really, really look forward to it. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today.
Thank you, Professor David Schumacher. Mr. Jamsid.
Great show, Sharif. I can't thank you enough for assembling this and picking these topics that are just led such productive conversations. As far as my concluding remarks are concerned, I just want to communicate a sense of optimism, because I say whenever we encounter a problem, the solution is just behind it, and be open to it, and to be open to change, because we're talking about the future. We have to have a futuristic orientation, and things will not stay the same. Change is the one constant we can count on. And so don't be afraid of it, because we never make optimal decisions based on fear. So if you want to, and we don't want to get too high or too low, stay balanced, but stay open to new ideas, new realities as they emerge. Don't treat them with fear and suspicion, but be prudent, assess them. Are they at what they say? Because as President Donald often says, we have a lot of snake oil salesmen out there. So don't just give your money away to anybody who says, I've got the latest, greatest thing. And, I have a systems background. I have a systems approach. And one of the things I admire about these shows is that many of your guest panelists also have that approach. But a systems approach means that you have to know the various parts of the organization that you're talking about. And you find out, if you take the systems approach, that the whole is greater than the sum. But, I wish I knew cricket better. I could make a better sports analogy for you. But I think basketball has become so international now. You can say, as a point guard, you wanted to know about your teammates' strengths and weaknesses. Don't give the guy the ball where he can't score. Give them the ball when he can score. And this guy is big, given to when it's close to the basket, because he can't shoot from the outside. This guy is good from the right side, not good from the left side. So give him the ball when he's on the right side. These are a way to make everybody better. The team ends up winning. And it doesn't matter how many points you score. It's not a me thing, it's a we thing. And that's what we have to think about together, because right now we have too many walls, and some people are focusing on building more of them to keep us apart. The idea is to build tear down the walls and build bridges instead. And I want to emphasize that every individual has a role to play in this. If you think it's too big for you, you just end up being another brick in the wall. Everybody can contribute. Everybody can be a part of a team, even if you're just the water boy, bringing water to the teammates. It doesn't matter what role you play. We make heroes out of these people that make vast amounts of money, but everybody that was part of that team ends up winning. And whether it's a stock option that you get, or because we still value currency, it doesn't matter. I think what matters is how you feel about yourself. And if you're doing good, if you're helping others, you feel good about yourself. If you're taking from others, it doesn't matter how much you end up with. You keep taking, you never feel good about yourself. You feel superior briefly, but then you just see more that has to be taken, or you won't satisfy that need that continues to drive you. We've seen this on the public stage for 4 years. Don't go down that path. Go down the path of cooperation and helping others achieve success, because you never get ahead by stepping on someone else. By lifting other people up, you end up making progress. So cooperate, teamwork, this is the focus of the future if we're going to continue to survive as Homo sapiens. And I believe that is in all our long-term best interests. Thanks again for a wonderful show, Sharif, and the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. James Sid. My young, energetic friend, Mr. Manuel.
Sure. Once again, thank you so much for the invitation. So, as concluding remarks, I would like to add that it's important. Space exploration is important, but we should not forget Earth. It's important to keep in mind space sustainability. It's important to look for technologies that could be used for both space exploration, but also to support development on Earth. So yeah, that's the point I would like to add. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Professor Rob, what are the concluding remarks you want to add for today?
Well, a lot of amazing things are coming in around space. If I were looking to participate in one of those programs and I was in college myself now, I'd probably look at robotics as being perhaps the most interesting area that's likely to expand significantly as we approach space exploration. I mean, if you think about it, Mars is the only planet we know of that's fully populated by robots at the moment from several entities. Though I'm reminded of the opening scene in My Favorite Martian, not the TV show, but the Disney movie, which was pretty bad. But it showed the Martian lander going through and bumping into the rocks, and just over the horizon is this modern Martian city with kids and spaceships and stuff. You couldn't see it, but the NASA guys were just so excited about the fact they'd found another rock. Anyway. But robots do just substantially better in hostile environments than people do. And much of the exploration we're going to be doing over the next, I argue, century is going to be automated with robots. And that means that's an area of opportunity. And the nice thing about robotic research is it doesn't require a lot of contact with hostile chemicals like rocket motor research does. It's not explosive by nature. It has applications that range from commercial to military to space exploration. So a lot of opportunity across a number of industries. And of course, a lot of the effort right now is autonomous robots that can act, make decisions, and work on their own. And of course, that crosses over into transportation and automotive as well. So if I were looking to get involved in space and I wanted a career path that was pretty much assured to be successful, regardless of where my country's space program went, robotics would be my choice. And I hope you folks all have an absolutely wonderful rest of the week and a great career and educational experience.
Thank you, Professor Rob, Professor David Schumacher, my friend Mr. Manuel, and Mr. James Id for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Thank you, our audience. Always support our initiatives. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye and take care.